Imagine the schoolyard blown by wind, cruel laughter cracking like whips. A disabled boy is shoved to the ground, sharp insults cutting into his tender heart. The adults turn away, friends fall silent. The whole world seems to have made a pact with evil. And then, from the shadow at the far end of the yard, a slight black girl steps forward. Her eyes blaze like a blade cutting through darkness. She stands there small but towering, facing down the bullies, confronting the cowardice of adults, defying the invisible rules that always favor the powerful. But the question is, if you were that boy's father, a billionaire who could buy the whole sky of power, what would you do? Revenge? Or would you tear the system apart so justice could finally be called by its true name? Because what happens next won't be just a schoolyard story. It will be a tempest sweeping the whole city, exposing the truths about power, racism, and human dignity. Get ready. Hit like, share, and subscribe now, and join the journey where heart, justice, and fate collide like a storm. On Friday noon, golden sunlight spilled over the oak trees in front of Crestwood Academy, the most prestigious private school in Massachusetts. The campus looked like a peaceful painting, the rustling of leaves, the rhythmic thump of a basketball in the distant sports court, and the glass-walled cafeteria buzzing with wealthy students coming and going. But inside that cafeteria, in just a few minutes, everything would erupt like a storm. In the corner, Elijah E.J. Whitmore, 12 years old, slowly made his way to his usual table on crutches. He was the only son of Richard Whitmore, a famous black billionaire across America, the owner of Whitmore Tech, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. Despite growing up in luxury, E.J. had a childhood with little laughter. An accident at age 8 left him unable to walk normally. His left foot was so weak that every step required the help of shiny metal crutches. He usually ate lunch alone, avoiding the noisy chatter of rich kids who rarely paid attention to a limping boy. Today was no different. E.J. quietly set his lunch tray down, pulled out a comic book, trying to ignore the curious stares. But he didn't know that. On the other side of the room, a group of students was waiting for this exact moment. Blake Harrison, 13, blonde hair, spotless white polo shirt, walked in with a few friends snickering behind him. Blake was the son of Senator William Harrison, a powerful voice in Washington, at Crestwood. Blake was notorious not only for his family name but also for his arrogance and love of bullying the weaker kids. "Hey, look." Blake tilted his chin toward E.J., his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Our little prince on crutches has arrived." Laughter broke out. Another kid added, "Wonder if his dad's money bought him a new pair of legs." Yet E.J. gripped his comic book tighter. He was used to this kind of teasing, but today they weren't stopping there. Blake and two of his friends carried their trays toward E.J.'s table. Their footsteps landed hard on the tiled floor, echoing like the sound of trouble coming. "Hello, Mr. Billionaire," Blake drawled, dropping his tray on E.J.'s table. "Want to have lunch with us or afraid you'll stain your fancy clothes?" E.J. bit his lip, staying silent. He was about to stand up and leave when Blake suddenly tipped over a soda, red liquid spreading across the table like fresh blood. "Oh, my bad," Blake said with mock concern. "Must have been your crutch slipping." "Huh." Laughter erupted again. Phones immediately shot up to record. At Crestwood, bullying always came with a live stream to show off online. E.J. trembled with anger and shame, But before he could say anything, Blake leaned down, his voice just loud enough for nearby kids to hear, "Your dad can buy the whole state, but not a normal pair of legs. That's kind of pathetic." Huh. The words cut into EJ like a knife. His face flushed red, his hand tightening on the crutch until his knuckles turned white. The crowd began whispering. A few black students sitting in the far corner glanced over but didn't dare intervene. At Crestwood, rich white kids were practically untouchable. Standing up to Blake meant going against the powerful Harrison family. And then, just as Blake was about to push EJ off his chair, a voice rang out calm but firm enough. "You picked the wrong person today. Blake." The whole room fell silent. From the shadows near the window, Aaliyah Carter stepped forward. A 12-year-old black girl with neatly braided hair and steady, sharp eyes. Aaliyah was the daughter of a black Marine who had died in Afghanistan. She and her mother lived in a working-class neighborhood an hour's drive from Crestwood. Thanks to a scholarship, Aaliyah was here at this privileged school where most students looked at her like a charity case. Blake raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Oh?" The scholarship girl speaks up. "What are you going to do?" "Call your folks from the ghetto." Aaliyah didn't answer. She walked up, set her tray down next to EJ's, her eyes locked on Blake. The whole room held its breath. Everyone expected her to back down. But Aaliyah simply said, clearly and quietly, "Leave. Now." Her voice wasn't loud, but something in it made Blake and the entire room hesitate. In those few seconds of silence, phones were still recording, and no one knew that the video about to be captured would shake Crestwood Academy and the entire country. Everything in the cafeteria happened so fast that EJ could barely breathe. The only thing he remembered was Aaliyah's eyes when she stood between him and Blake, calm, unwavering, like a shield. But as the crowd began to murmur, EJ's mind drifted back to the years before, the years when he felt like nothing more than a lonely shadow wandering through the vast Whitmore mansion in the suburbs of Boston. The mansion covered nearly 30,000 square feet, with glass walls reflecting the sky, a heated pool glowing through the night, and a tennis court as pristine as those in architectural magazines. But to EJ, it had never been home. His mother, Melissa Whitmore, had died in a car accident when EJ was only 5. That fateful day was like a scar carved into his memory, even though he only remembered fragments. It was a cloudy Sunday afternoon. Melissa had taken EJ to the park near the Charles River. He still remembered her laughter as she packed the apple pies into the basket. She promised to teach him to ride the training wheel bike they'd bought the day before. They left the park as the sun began to set. EJ sat in the back seat, clutching his teddy bear, eyes half closed as his mother hummed, "You Are My Sunshine." Then a blinding headlight flashed from the opposite lane. The screech of brakes tore through the air. The horrific crash flung EJ from his seat, the world spinning out of control. He only remembered his mother shouting his name, "EJ, get down," and then darkness. When he woke up in the hospital, his arm was in a cast, his left leg aching in pain. They told EJ his mother didn't make it. A runaway truck had slammed into the driver's side right where Melissa was sitting. The last image burned into EJ's memory was his mother's hand, limp and bloody hair strands whipping in the wind, as ambulance sirens wailed under the night sky. After the accident, Richard Whitmore, his father, was the only family EJ had left. But Richard was building Whitmore Tech, constantly flying between Boston, New York, and Silicon Valley. Richard had grown up facing bitter racism in college lecture halls and investor boardrooms alike. He believed power and success were the only shields to protect his family from the world's contempt. But that belief made him a distant father. He gave EJ the best doctors, the best schools, but was rarely home for dinner. The massive kitchen was usually just EJ and Maria, the housekeeper. One evening, when EJ was 8, he sat at the dining table, crutch by his side, watching his father home early for once. EJ hesitated before asking, "Ad, do you ever wish things were different, like that I wasn't like this?" Richard paused, his knife and fork still. The man who had faced billion-dollar negotiations now looked suddenly heavy with sorrow. "I only wish," he said softly, "that your mother were here to hug you every day." After that, the room fell silent. Only the clock ticked on, cold and steady. EJ knew his father loved him, but it was the kind of love measured in tuition payments and medical bills, not in listening to a boy talk about being bullied at school. At Crestwood Academy, where most kids drove Teslas to class and vacationed in Europe, EJ always felt out of place, not because of money his father could have bought the whole school, but because of his limp. 12-year-olds could be ruthless about differences. They laughed when EJ ran slowly in gym class, filmed him falling on the grass, whispering all that money, and he can't even buy new legs, every night in his room overlooking the lake. EJ watched superhero movies. He liked Iron Man, a man who turned pain into power. But deep down, EJ knew he wasn't a hero. He was just a kid who wanted someone to sit with at lunch, someone who wouldn't film him for TikTok. And then Aaliyah Carter walked into his life with those steady eyes, and everything felt different. But along with that came a new fear. Aaliyah was the only black scholarship student in a school full of rich white kids. Blake Harrison and his friends didn't just enjoy bullying. They threw around racial slurs like confetti. EJ remembered what they said when Aaliyah first arrived, the scholarship girl. From the hood, they laughed. Aaliyah said nothing, just turned the page of her book. EJ wondered how many times she had heard things like that in her life. And today, when she stood between him and Blake, did she know what it might cost her? For the first time, EJ wasn't just afraid for himself. He was afraid for someone else. What he didn't know was that a real storm was about to hit Crestwood Academy. Before stepping into the cafeteria that day, Aaliyah Carter had never thought her life would cross paths with that of a white billionaire's son. She came to Crestwood only to study and to honor the promise she had made to her father. Aaliyah's father, Sergeant Marcus Carter, was a U.S. Marine. He enlisted at 18, served through Iraq and Afghanistan, and returned with a medal covered in desert dust and eyes weary from war. Marcus was a quiet, disciplined black man who carried within him a simple belief: true strength doesn't come from muscles. It comes from discipline and compassion. Aaliyah first heard those words when she was 4, in the backyard of their small house in Roxbury, a low-income, mostly black neighborhood in Boston. Every evening, while her mother worked night shifts, her father taught her basic martial arts. With every punch into the air, every push-up, he spoke slowly: "Don't fight out of anger. Fight only to protect the weak, but never let hatred control you." When Aaliyah was 7, Marcus Carter received his final deployment order. She remembered that morning vividly, her father in uniform, the smell of bitter coffee in their tiny kitchen, her mother, Denise Carter, standing silently by the sink, eyes red and swollen. Marcus knelt down and hugged Aaliyah tightly. "He'll be back," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But if one day I can't remember this, your greatest strength is your heart, not your fists." He left on a cloudy morning, and he never came back. A month later, an officer knocked on the Carter family door. A neatly folded flag was handed to her mother. Denise collapsed on the doorstep, the crumpled death notice in her hands, her sobs drowning out the sirens wailing in the street. Aaliyah just stood there, watching, too young to fully grasp death, only feeling the sky go dark above her. The years of struggle. After Marcus' death, her mother worked night shifts as a nurse, struggling to pay rent, school fees, and an endless pile of bills. They lived in a neighborhood where police sirens often screamed through the night, where some kids dropped out because their families had nothing left to give. Once, Aaliyah asked her mother, "Why do people always look at us like we don't belong?" Denise sighed, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Because this world is full of people who judge you before they know you. Just remember, you're not what they say you are." Aaliyah learned what racism felt like very early on. In 3rd grade, a white kid threw a banana peel on her desk and said, "Looks like the perfect lunch for you." In 5th grade, a parent looked her up and down during a school conference and asked the teacher, did this girl get in through some charity program? Another time, Aaliyah and her mother went to the grocery store. A security guard followed them through every aisle, just because they looked like the kids on the shoplifting footage last week. Aaliyah learned to stay silent. Her father had told her, "Don't waste your strength on every fight. Choose the ones that matter most." So she buried herself in books, at home, when she wasn't studying. She trained. Each punch, each push-up was her way of refusing to break, her way of telling the world him still here, him still standing. At 12, Aaliyah earned a full scholarship to Crestwood Academy, a school where kids spent summers in Florida or Europe, while she only knew the squeaky brakes of Boston's old buses. On her first day, she wore a crisp white shirt ironed by her mother and a pair of worn-out sneakers. She heard the whispers, "The scholarship girl." From Roxbury, the black neighborhood, one rich kid sneered, "What is this? A community center?" Now Aaliyah said nothing. She remembered her father's words, "Silence can be strength too." But deep down, she felt the invisible wall separating her from the rest of the school. At Crestwood, Aaliyah excelled in academics and played basketball brilliantly, but she always kept her distance. She had seen the way Blake Harrison looked at her, half mockery, half scrutiny, once in the gym. Blake threw a basketball so hard it nearly hit her face. When she caught it in time, he smirked. "Nice reflexes. Must be used to dodging bullets in your neighborhood. Huh." His friends roared with laughter. Aaliyah gripped the ball tight and threw it back without a word. She knew that here. One wrong move, one flash of anger, and they'd label her the angry black girl. Many nods. Aaliyah wondered if it was worth it trying to be smarter, better, more obedient, just to prove herself to people who had already decided she didn't belong. In those moments, she opened the little wooden box where she kept the letter her father wrote before deployment. You can win every fight in the world, but if you lose yourself, you lose everything. Don't let hatred turn you into what you despise. She read it so often she had memorized it. Maybe that was why today, when she saw E.J. Whitmore being bullied by Blake, she stood up not to fight, but to protect, just as her father had taught protect the weak. but keep your heart at peace. As Aaliyah walked across the cafeteria to face Blake Harrison, she knew exactly what this might cost her. This wasn't just a bully. It was the privilege of a senator's son, the weight of race, the system that always sided with power. But Aaliyah stepped forward anyway, because sometimes silence carried its own kind of wound. That afternoon, the cafeteria at Crestwood Academy felt frozen in place. The air was so thick you could hear every single breath. In the middle of the sunlit room, Aaliyah Carter stood facing Blake Harrison, the boy everyone at this school feared and flattered. Behind her, Elijah E.J. Whitmore sat rigid in his chair, his hand gripping his crutch so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He'd never seen anyone stand up to Blake before, let alone do it for him. Blake smirked, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Oh, the scholarship girl wants to be a hero. What is this? Are you auditioning to be the lead in some cheap Netflix drama?" His friends burst into laughter. One kid held up his phone, the screen already flashing with the title Roxbury Girl vs. Crestwood King. Hot drama. Blake stepped closer until he was right in Aaliyah's face, lowering his voice just enough for the whole room to hear. "At this school, you're just the black scholarship girl. The fact we even let you stand here is already charity. Maybe in your neighborhood they call you a queen or whatever. Sorry, sweetheart here, you're nothing." He emphasized the words black like a slap across the room. Another kid chimed in, snickering. "Yeah, right. Roxbury's only famous for cops and gangs." Cruel laughter followed, each word like a dagger aimed at Aaliyah. She didn't move, didn't even blink. Her eyes locked on Blake's, steady and unyielding. The silence around her more unnerving than any scream. In her head, her father's voice echoed from long ago, "You can win every fight in the world, but if you lose yourself, you lose everything." Aaliyah's hand tightened into a fist. Her heartbeat pounded like a drum. Blake, irritated by her calm, turned to EJ, sneering, "And you? Prince Crutches, aren't you going to thank your little hero here? Or do you think you're special just 'cause Daddy's rich? News flash. Whitmore money can't buy you a new pair of legs." EJ's shoulders shook, his eyes burning red with anger. He wanted to scream, to do something, but Blake's words chained him to his seat. One of Blake's friends, blonde hair, crisp white polo, tilted his chin at Aaliyah. "Hey, bet you're used to guns in your neighborhood." "Huh, at Crestwood, we fight with money, not fists." The group cackled again. Someone in the back yelled ghetto, the word slicing through the noise like poison. A few black students in the corner tightened their backpack straps, but no one moved. At Crestwood, the senator's son was the law. Crossing Blake Harrison was social suicide. Inside Aaliyah, two voices battled, hit him. "Don't let them humiliate you like this." No. One punch, and they'll call you the angry, violent black girl. Exactly what they want. Sweat slicked her palms. She thought of her mother, of unpaid bills, of college dreams, of the letter her father left to protect the weak. But keep your heart at peace. Blake crossed his arms, a predator savoring the moment. "What's wrong? I thought you were tough. Or maybe you're scared. Yeah, in your neighborhood, you probably just shut up when power speaks." Aaliyah raised her head. Her eyes were like blades as she spoke, slow and cold. "No, I'm not scared. I'm disgusted." The cafeteria erupted in gasps. Some kids whistled. Blake's face turned crimson. No one had ever humiliated him in public like this. His voice dropped into a growl. You're going to pay for that." He suddenly grabbed EJ's crutch, yanking it hard. EJ nearly toppled to the floor. The entire room roared in shock. Aaliyah lunged forward, planting herself between EJ and Blake, her voice ringing out enough. The sound of her lunch tray slamming onto the table cracked through the room like a gunshot. Phones pointed from every direction. The entire cafeteria held its breath. Everyone understood this moment wouldn't stop at Crestwood. It would spread far beyond the polished walls of this school, because for the first time, someone had stood up to privilege, to race, to the untouchable system Blake Harrison represented, and that someone was a 12-year-old girl from Roxbury. The crash of the lunch tray onto the table rang out, sharp and brutal, tearing through the silence that had settled over Crestwood Academy's cafeteria like a blade. Everyone froze. A few phones vibrated in the hands of students filming the live stream. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe heavily. At the center of the room, Aaliyah Carter stood between Elijah E.J. Whitmore and Blake Harrison. Opposite them, Blake gripped the crutch he had just snatched from E.J., his face flushed, his eyes flashing with contempt and rage. In that moment, everything Aaliyah had endured until now surged through her like a flood. The mocking laughs when she first arrived at school, wearing her faded sneakers. The hateful taunts, scholarship girl. Roxbury that pricked at her like thorns. Her father's death. Her mother's night shifts, being followed in the supermarket simply because of her skin. All the accumulated anger, hurt, and endurance of many years swelled inside Aaliyah like a mountain splitting open. Blake sneered, his voice hissing between his teeth. "Look at her, the Roxbury hero. What are you going to do? Give us one of your cheap moral speeches." One of his friends added, "Yeah, probably in her neighborhood they only know how to solve things with fists." They laughed, cruel and poisonous, throwing gasoline on the blaze burning in Aaliyah's eyes. Aaliyah took a step forward. Her voice dropped, trembling with fury but each word sharp as a blade. "Give the crutch back to him. Now. Right. Now." Blake curled his lip. Or what? Aaliyah drew a deep breath. Her gaze cut through the room and sent chills down spines. "Then you'll see something you've never seen in your life." A murmur rose. A few students whispered, "Is she really gonna do it?" Blake laughed loudly, deliberately, holding the crutch up like a trophy. "Look," he shouted. "The Roxbury heroine wants to save the prince on crutches. That was the last straw." Aaliyah lunged forward so fast Blake didn't have time to react. With a quick pivot, she caught his arm and yanked the crutch from his grasp. He stumbled. The room exploded in shouts. Blake roared and lunged, but Aaliyah was already blocking his path, her eyes cold as steel. "You want to fight, Blake, here, in front of everyone." The cafeteria held its breath. Blake's friends froze. They knew that if a fight broke out while dozens of phones live-streamed, the Harrison family could not sweep it under the rug like before. Blake ground his teeth and lowered his voice. "You'll regret challenging me." Aaliyah tightened her hold on the crutch. Her words cut through the wall of privilege like a knife. I regret staying silent for so long, letting you humiliate people because of their skin, their background. Not today. Blake, not anymore." A hush fell. Several students of color nodded quietly. A few white students glanced at one another, uneasy. For the first time, someone dared to say aloud what everyone had been thinking. The moment E.J. stood up. E.J. rose on his crutches. His voice trembled but carried clearly. "Blake, Do you think you're king here just because your dad's a senator? You're nothing but a cowardly bully." An uproar followed. Blake's face flushed as if blood had rushed to his head. Blake snarled and charged at EJ, but Aaliyah stepped in front of him. In that instant, everything Aaliyah had held back years of silence, her father's advice, long nights of enduring prejudice erupted. She lowered her voice so only Blake could hear touch him again. "And I swear you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Blake faltered, not because he feared being hit, but because Aaliyah's gaze seemed to burn him. For the first time, he felt himself losing control in front of someone he had always scorned. The cafeteria was utterly silent. Only the pounding of dozens of students' hearts could be heard. Phones continued to record, all eyes fixed on the two standing opposite each other. Blake exhaled sharply and threw one last line. "Fine. You just dug your own grave." He shot them a look of hatred and motioned for his friends to leave the room. Aaliyah stood motionless, crutch tight in her hand, watching Blake go. The room erupted into chatter. Many students rushed out and began uploading videos to social media. EJ looked at Aaliyah, a mix of gratitude and worry in his eyes. He knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning of a real storm. Within minutes after Aaliyah walked out of the cafeteria, the 3-minute video hit TikTok, then spread to Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube like wildfire. The first TikTok title read, "12-year-old black girl stands up to senators. Son at Crestwood and wins." Within an hour, dozens of edited versions flooded the internet. Some showed the moment Aaliyah twisted Blake's wrist, knocking the crutch from his hand. Others focused only on her words, "You can insult me, but you will never make me bow." By the next morning, that line had become the hashtag "Never Bow Down." At Crestwood, the administration called an emergency meeting. Principal Miller, who had always handled things quietly, now faced a wave of outrage from parents and students alike. A group of students created an Instagram account called Justice for Aaliyah, demanding disciplinary action against Blake and a public apology to Aaliyah and EJ. But the other side, the children of the wealthy and powerful, quietly criticized Aaliyah. She just wants attention. Blake was only joking. She caused the real problem. Such comments spread across the Facebook pages of Crestwood parents, where upper-class mothers usually posted tea parties and European vacations. 2 days later, a local newspaper headline screamed, "Senator William Harrison's son accused of bullying and racism at Crestwood Academy." Reporters dug up videos, interviewed students anonymously. The story was no longer about kids at school. It was about politics, privilege, and power. At the Harrison mansion, Senator William Harrison slammed the newspaper onto the table. He barked at his wife. "This damn school can't keep one thing quiet." We're in election season. Blake sat silently in the corner, his face pale. He never imagined his usual bullying would explode into this. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore, EJ's father, was in a board meeting when his assistant brought him an iPad. "Sir, you should see this." He saw his son in the video shaking hands, terrified eyes, and a black girl standing in front of him like a tiny warrior. Richard froze. All these years, he had built Whitmore Tech, believing money and power could protect his son. But now, he saw the truth. EJ needed a friend, a shield, not just walls and bodyguards. On Twitter, Justice for Aaliyah and Never Bow Down shot straight to the top of the trending list. Thousands of comments poured in. "She's so brave, only 12, and she spoke truth to power." Racism at elite schools. Not new, but this is the first time someone fought back. We stand with Aaliyah. Every kid deserves respect. A famous civil rights lawyer retweeted the video with the caption, "This isn't just about one school. It's about power, race, and justice." While social media erupted, Aaliyah sat quietly in her small Roxbury apartment. She wasn't used to the spotlight, to being anyone's symbol. Her mother, Denise Carter, looked at her with a mix of pride and concern. "Are you okay, Aaliyah?" The girl nodded, but her heart was unsettled. She had always been strong, always endured, but now, with the whole world watching, she didn't know what was coming next. 3 days later, Richard Whitmore's office called Denise Carter. A sleek black car pulled up to Roxbury, inviting mother and daughter to the Whitmore mansion. Denise was stunned. "The billionaire himself wants to see us." The driver smiled. "Mr. Whitmore said he owes the young lady his thanks." The media swarmed the story. Reporters camped outside Crestwood, the Harrison mansion, even the Carter family's tiny apartment in Roxbury. A national news anchor opened the evening broadcast. A video from a Boston private school has gone viral, raising questions about racism, privilege, and the responsibility of those in power. But it didn't end there. An anonymous student leaked group chats between Blake and his friends to the press. In them, they mocked Aaliyah with slurs and plotted to humiliate her again to restore Harrison's honor. Even Blake's defenders went silent. Crestwood Academy was forced to launch an internal investigation. Senator Harrison's office was besieged by reporters. And at the center of the storm was Aaliyah, 12-year-old black girl from Roxbury who had unwillingly become a symbol of courage. The black Cadillac glided through the worn streets of Roxbury before stopping in front of the small Carter home. The driver stepped out, his voice polite but firm. "Carter, Miss Aaliyah, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." Denise Carter gripped her daughter's hand tightly. She had never set foot in the world of men like Richard Whitmore, world where money and power were counted in millions, a world far removed from their 2-bedroom house and old, rattling car. Aaliyah stayed silent, her expression calm as always, but inside her heart was pounding. The Whitmore estate sprawled across the Boston suburbs, a vast mansion with walls of glass reflecting the evening sky. As the car drove through the gates, Denise let out a quiet breath. "Baby," she whispered, "this feels like another world." Aaliyah saw the perfectly trimmed hedges, the glittering pool in the distance, but she didn't let herself be overawed. She remembered what her father once told her. "Wealth doesn't make anyone noble. Only actions do." Richard Whitmore stepped out of the front doors. He wore a gray suit, tall and composed, his face weathered by storms both personal and professional. He shook Denise's hand first, then turned to Aaliyah. "Hello," he said. "I'm Richard Whitmore, and I believe I owe you a great deal." Aaliyah took his hand. Her own was small but firm. "I didn't do much, sir," Aaliyah replied evenly. "I just did what was right." Richard studied her. At 12, she had the eyes of someone who had already carried too much loss. They sat in the grand living room, soft golden light glowing over oil paintings on the walls. EJ was there too, still a little shy, but when he looked at Aaliyah, a faint smile crossed his face, a smile Richard realized he hadn't seen on his son in years. "I saw the video," Richard began. "I saw a young girl stand up to an entire system just to protect someone else." "Aaliyah, did you know that could have cost you dearly?" Aaliyah nodded. "I know. But sometimes, silence is its own kind of wound. I didn't want to stay silent anymore. The words stopped Richard cold. They reminded him of his own youth when he had been humiliated in college for being the only black student in his economics class. When he swallowed his anger so one day he could build Whitmore Tech from the ground up. "She's just like her father," Denise said softly, her hand on Aaliyah's shoulder. "Marcus always believed in justice, no matter the cost." Richard nodded. He had read about Marcus Carter, the black Marine who never made it back from the Middle East. Now, looking into Aaliyah's eyes, Richard understood that same fire still burned in the daughter he'd left behind. After dinner, Richard invited Aaliyah into the garden behind the mansion. They sat on a stone bench under the warm glow of the garden lights. "You know," Richard said slowly, "I used to think money and power could shield my son from every hurt. But watching that video, I realized I was wrong." Aaliyah stayed quiet, listening. "You did what I failed to do all these years." Richard continued. "You stood up when things were wrong. I know what you faced wasn't just a spoiled boy. You were standing against a whole system that's never been fair to people like us." For the first time, his voice trembled slightly. "I want to help you, not with some scholarship or donation. I want to give you a voice. Demand Crestwood investigate. Demand they change how they treat students, especially students of color. Will you stand with me?" Aaliyah hesitated. She wasn't used to adults asking for her voice. At Crestwood, they only told her to be quiet, to keep the image clean. As she faltered, "I will, but I don't want to do this for fame. I just want the kids after us not to go through what I went through." Richard smiled. "Then we start tomorrow." But as they left the garden, another black car pulled up to the gates of the Whitmore estate. The man stepping out was none other than Senator William Harrison Blake's powerful father, and he hadn't come to apologize. He had come to deliver a warning. No sooner had Aaliyah's Cadillac left the Whitmore gates than a sleek Lincoln pulled up to the front. From the shadowed interior, William Harrison stepped out in a dark navy suit, a red tie like an exclamation point against the Boston night. He needed no introduction. William carried the smell of power used to command rather than ask, to demand obedience rather than accept dissent. Richard Whitmore stood on the front steps, swirling a glass of red wine, his gaze cold. Two men, two worlds, faced each other in heavy silence. William strode in without waiting to be invited, his voice low and icy. "Whitmore, we need to talk. And well, make it quick. I don't have much time for children's business." The phrase "children's business" landed like an invisible slap. Richard set his glass down, eyes fixed on his counterpart. "You call your son humiliating a black girl and a disabled child in the middle of a school children's business?" William shrugged, contempt thick in his tone. "Kids joke around. Your boy's just weak, that's all. As for that girl," he paused, lips forming a thin smile, "she should know her place. She's just some kid from the Roxbury projects, not a hero." Richard clenched his fist but kept his voice steady. "Did you just say, know her place?" William poured himself a glass of wine, acting as if he were at home. "Whitmore, you and I both know how this world runs. Some are born to lead, some are born to serve. You can buy houses, cars, companies, but there are things money never buys. Class, for example." He emphasized the last words like a blade. Richard laughed, a harsh, dry sound that echoed through the wide room. "Class, you mean your son. He uses his privilege to bully a disabled child and insult a girl whose father died in war. If that's your idea of class, Harrison, then this world is rotten." William slammed his glass down, the clink sharp. "Listen, Whitmore, you may be the first black billionaire to buy half this town, but you're still an outsider in our game of power. Politics is our domain. Law is our domain. That school exists because of donations from the Harrison family. You understand?" Richard met William's eyes, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you just say? Black billionaire." So the thin coat of civility peels away and reveals what you really believe, that skin color determines a person's worth. William showed no sign of flinching. He stepped closer, each word deliberate. "In this country, Whitmore, we write the laws. You just exploit the law to get rich. Don't forget, one signature from me can make Whitmore Tech's biggest government contract disappear." Richard rose to his feet. The room fell utterly silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. He closed the distance until they were inches apart, his voice rolling like thunder. "You think I'm afraid all my life? From Harvard to Wall Street, I've heard words like yours. Know your place, be quiet, but I'm still standing," and they fade into oblivion. He looked William square in the eye. "You want to use your power to silence me? Fine. He'll show the world you used power to protect a bully, while we stood for justice." Richard grabbed an iPad and threw it down on the table. The screen lit up with Blake's group messages, racial slurs, scheming to humiliate Aaliyah again to teach that Roxbury girl her place. William's face flickered, then he quickly masked it. "You don't understand politics? Whitmore, public opinion is the easiest thing to change. In a week, people will forget this." Richard's voice hardened. "No, Harrison, not this time. He'll make sure they never forget." William tightened his grip, eyes flashing a threat. "You're making an enemy of the most powerful man in this state, Whitmore." Richard stepped even closer. "You're wrong. I don't fear your power. I fear silence. Silence kills justice. And this time, you'll be the one afraid." William turned and walked toward the car. Before he left, he threw over his shoulder, cold as steel, "You and that girl will regret this." Richard watched him go, his voice carrying through the room. "No, Harrison. Your rotten system is the thing that will regret this." The door slammed shut. Outside, the Boston wind howled as if warning that a real storm was coming. 3 days after the fiery confrontation at the Whitmore estate, Boston woke up to headlines across every paper: Senator's son accused of bullying and racism, Crestwood Academy at the eye of the storm. Black billionaire Richard Whitmore speaks out. Justice for Aaliyah Carter and Elijah Whitmore. The story exploded nationwide. From Fox News and CNN to independent YouTube channels, everyone wanted the angle a 12-year-old black girl from Roxbury, the son of a black billionaire, and a powerful senator running for re-election. The hashtag, Yarn Justice for Aaliyah, stayed at #1 on Twitter for 72 straight hours. Millions shared the video of Aaliyah confronting Blake, with outraged comments pouring in, "Enough kids deserve respect. Power and money cannot hide racism. As a parent, I want justice for Aaliyah." Student live streams from Crestwood, leaked email showing administrators ignoring previous bullying complaints. All of it formed a tidal wave sweeping every platform. Angela Brooks, a prominent civil rights attorney, appeared on CNN. "This is no longer just schoolyard bullying. This is a human rights violation, systemic racism. The Harrison family and Crestwood administration must be held legally accountable. She announced she would represent Aaliyah and her family pro bono and called for a federal investigation into Crestwood Academy. Cornered. William Harrison held a press conference. Standing before dozens of microphones and cameras with Blake at his side, he put on a calm face. My son has personally apologized to those involved. But I remind everyone, do not let social media distort the truth. My family does not tolerate racism, and we believe in justice. No sooner had he spoken than reporters produced new evidence: Blake's group chat messages, full of racist slurs and plans to humiliate Aaliyah again. The press room erupted. That same day, Richard Whitmore sat down on 60 Minutes. His voice was low and resonant, his outrage plain. This is not just about Aaliyah or Elijah. This is about millions of kids who are bullied and dismissed because of their skin or background. We will take this to court, and we will win. His words rang like a declaration of war. Angela Brooks filed suit against Crestwood Academy and the Harrison family, alleging systematic bullying, racial discrimination in an educational setting, cover-ups to protect political reputations. The U.S. Department of Education announced it would investigate Crestwood under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. News channels broadcast live as police seized servers and searched internal records at the school. The story had become more than a school scandal. It split the Community One camp rallied behind Aaliyah, calling her the 12-year-old symbol of justice. Another defended the Harrisons, claiming this is all being exaggerated to derail a political career. Protests sprang up at Crestwood, parents carrying signs reading "No More Silence." Students of color from other schools came to support Aaliyah. While the nation roiled, Aaliyah Carter remained a 12-year-old girl in a small Roxbury room. She didn't fully grasp court filings or TV speeches. But each night, she read the messages of support arriving from everywhere you make us proud. My daughter says she wants to be brave like you. Thank you for speaking up. Those messages made Aaliyah understand she was no longer fighting alone. The night before the first hearing, Richard called Angela Brooks tomorrow. They'll try every political trick to smear us, he warned. Angela replied calmly, "Let them try. We have the truth. This time, justice will not be silenced." That morning, Boston held its breath. The federal court hearing had become the center of the nation's attention. Dozens of major news channels broadcasted live as crowds filled the square outside the courthouse, holding signs high: "Justice for Aaliyah" and "No More Silence." Inside the courtroom, the air was tight as a drawn bowstring. Everyone was there: Aaliyah Carter, Richard Whitmore, Elijah, civil rights attorney Angela Brooks, William Harrison and his son Blake, along with a swarm of reporters ready to capture every second. Judge Miriam O'Connor struck her gavel, her voice cutting like thunder today. "We are here to find the truth, not to protect power, not to preserve privilege, only the truth." Angela Brooks opened with the video that had shocked the entire country: Aaliyah standing before EJ, Blake hurling insults, and the 12-year-old girl staring him down with blazing eyes. "You can insult me, but you will never make me bow." The words echoed through the courtroom. Many held their breath. The Harrisons' attorney rose, brimming with confidence. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than childish teasing, blown out of proportion by the media and a billionaire seeking sympathy points. My client, Senator Harrison, has devoted his entire life to public service." But Angela Brooks smiled coldly and revealed new evidence. Internal Crestwood email showing the administration had covered up at least 7 bullying incidents involving Blake because the Harrison family donates generously. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Richard Whitmore took the stand, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Senator Harrison, you think money and power put you above the law my whole life. I've heard people say, 'Know your place,' but today you will hear this: the law knows no color, only justice." Applause thundered across the room. Even some white parents stood up, chanting, "Justice, justice," before William Harrison could respond. A reporter burst in with leaked footage of a fundraising event where Harrison had said, "We need to keep Crestwood clean. Can't let kids from the projects turn this place into a zoo." The courtroom froze for a few seconds before erupting like a volcano. Shouts and boos filled the air. Judge O'Connor had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. William Harrison's face drained of color. Blake slumped in his chair, avoiding everyone's gaze. Through the chaos, Aaliyah, the 12-year-old at the center of it all, stepped up to the witness stand. Her voice was quiet but cut like ice. "I don't want revenge. I just want no child to ever hear words like that again. I want schools to be safe, not places where the loudest wallet decides what's right." Her simple words carried so much weight that the courtroom fell silent. Some people wiped their eyes. Under the crushing weight of evidence and public outrage, William Harrison finally stood, his voice trembling for the first time. I apologize. I was wrong, but it was too late." The Senate Ethics Committee immediately announced his suspension pending investigation. His re-election campaign ended right there. Judge O'Connor read the ruling one. Crestwood Academy was ordered to undergo a full restructuring and establish an independent anti-racism oversight board. 2. William Harrison was suspended from office, with his case referred to the Federal Ethics Committee. 3. Blake Harrison was expelled from Crestwood, sentenced to 500 hours of community service, and required to attend mandatory counseling. 4. The Marcus Carter Scholarship Fund was established with $50 million from Richard Whitmore, dedicated to disadvantaged students across the state. The courtroom exploded with applause. Justice for Aaliyah and Never Bow Down dominated social media. This time, not just in the U.S., but across Europe and Africa as well. That afternoon, Aaliyah returned to Roxbury. She stood before her father's grave Marcus Carter and laid her small hand on the cold stone daddy. "I did it, not just for me, for every kid like me." Richard Whitmore and AJ stood silently behind her. He knew some battles weren't just about winning, they were about opening a new road forward. AJ looked at Aaliyah, eyes full of admiration. "You're the real hero, Aaliyah." The girl smiled softly. "I just did what was right." Cameras caught the moment, and for years to come, people would remember Aaliyah Carter as a symbol of courage, of justice, and of the belief that even a child could shake the walls of power. Maybe we've all been Elijah at some point, or we've met an Elijah in our lives someone disrespected, hurt, pushed to the margin simply for being different. And maybe, somewhere around us, there's also an Aaliyah, someone brave enough to step out of the shadows and say, "Enough," even knowing there may be a price to pay. This story isn't only about a 12-year-old girl or a disabled boy. It's also a mirror held up to the society we live in. A society sometimes so accustomed to bowing to power, so used to staying silent in the face of injustice, that it forgets silence itself can be a kind of violence. Richard Whitmore, the billionaire father, chose not to be silent. He used his power not for vengeance, but to force a system to change so that truth would no longer be buried beneath money and privilege. And that is the story's biggest message power, if it isn't used to defend what's right, is nothing more than the hollow shadow of reputation. But deeper than that, this story reminds us of courage, the kind that can come from a 12-year-old girl, from a father who has endured bitter hardship, or from any one of us when we choose justice over silence. And perhaps, by daring to speak once, we can save some Elijah from feeling abandoned and give some Aaliyah hope that you are not alone. Thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can spread more stories about justice, courage, and faith in what is good.